Welcome to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, where tonight we'll journey through magical corridors, enchanted classrooms, and the peaceful grounds of the castle. Join us as we explore the wizarding world in a story designed to help you drift into a peaceful sleep. After our story concludes, you'll hear the gentle crackling of a common room fire to help you fall asleep. There will be no advertisements or interruptions, just the continuous, soothing sounds of flames to carry you into your dreams. Now take a deep breath, relax your mind, and let's begin our magical adventure. The evening sky was painted in gentle brushstrokes of lavender and gold as Oliver made his way across the Hogwarts grounds, his footsteps softly crunching on the fallen leaves that carpeted the path. He was returning from the Quidditch pitch, where the Ravenclaw team had been practicing late into the dusk, the cool autumn air filling his lungs with each breath, clearing away the remnants of exhaustion from hours of flying drills. Oliver wasn't like the other third years. While they dreamed of adventure and daring exploits, he found comfort in quiet moments like these. Walking alone at twilight, listening to the distant hoots of owls beginning their nightly hunts, feeling the gentle kiss of evening mist against his skin. As he walked, Oliver reached into his satchel for his favorite quill, a gift from his grandmother, crafted from the feather of a silver pheasant and enchanted to never blunt or run dry. His fingers searched the soft leather interior but found nothing. With a small frown, he stopped and opened his bag wider, checking each pocket and compartment. The quill was nowhere to be found. Retracing his steps in his mind, Oliver remembered taking notes during a brief team meeting after practice. He must have left the quill on the wooden benches at the edge of the field. With a small sigh, he turned around, the castle's warm lights growing more distant behind him as he headed back toward the pitch. The Quidditch field was empty now, the other players long gone to the great hall for dinner. Oliver's footsteps echoed softly in the stillness as he approached the bench where they had gathered after practice. Sure enough, there was his quill, its silver-tipped feather catching the last light of day. As he reached to pick it up, a sudden breeze swept across the field, lifting the delicate quill and carrying it away. "Oh, come on," Oliver murmured, watching as his cherished possession danced on the air currents, floating tantalizingly out of reach. He followed, arms outstretched, but the wind seemed to have a mischievous mind of its own, keeping the quill just beyond his grasp. The breeze led him toward the edge of the field, where the manicured grass gave way to wilder terrain. Oliver hesitated as he realized where the quill was heading, toward the dark line of trees that marked the beginning of the Forbidden Forest. Students were strictly prohibited from entering the forest alone, especially as night approached. Yet the quill continued its ballet in the air, and Oliver couldn't bear to lose it. Just a few steps, he told himself, just to the very edge. He quickened his pace, following the silvery glint as it bobbed and weaved through the air. The quill finally came to rest atop a moss-covered stone just beyond the first line of trees. Oliver paused at the forest threshold, weighing his options. The forest's edge was still visible from the castle grounds, he reasoned, and he wouldn't be going deep into the woods. Surely retrieving his quill couldn't be that dangerous. Taking a deep breath, Oliver stepped into the forest. The atmosphere changed immediately. The air grew thicker, more fragrant with earthy scents, and the sounds of the castle grounds faded away, replaced by the soft rustling of leaves and the occasional creak of ancient branches overhead. He approached the stone where his quill lay and carefully picked it up, tucking it securely into his robe pocket. As he turned to leave, a subtle shift in the forest's symphony made him pause. The chirping of crickets had momentarily ceased, and the rustling of leaves had fallen silent. Oliver felt a prickle at the back of his neck, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Slowly he turned around. Between two massive oak trees, partially obscured by shadows, stood a being Oliver had only read about in his Care of Magical Creatures textbook. A centaur, half human, half horse, but unlike any description he had encountered. This centaur was immense, towering over the surrounding foliage, its equine body powerfully built, yet somehow moving with the grace of a shadow. But most striking was its coloring. Its flank and human torso were covered in what appeared to be a shimmering silver coat, catching what little light filtered through the canopy and reflecting it like polished metal. Oliver stood perfectly still, unsure whether to run, speak, or simply wait. The massive creature made the decision for him by taking a single step forward, emerging more fully from the shadows. In the clearer view, Oliver could see that the centaur's silver back was not merely a trick of the light, but a distinctive pattern of gleaming silver hair that ran from its human shoulders down its equine spine, shimmering against an otherwise midnight black coat. The centaur's face was solemn, weathered like ancient stone, with eyes that reflected the first emerging stars of the evening. It didn't speak, but simply regarded Oliver with a gaze so deep and knowing that the boy felt as though the creature could see beyond his physical form into the very essence of who he was. After what seemed like an eternity held in that gaze, the centaur slowly raised one arm, directing Oliver's attention upward. His eyes followed the gesture to find a gap in the forest canopy through which the evening sky was visible. The first stars were emerging, pinpricks of silver against deepening blue. The centaur's arm moved deliberately, tracing a pattern among the stars. Oliver watched, entranced, as the massive being connected invisible lines between the celestial bodies, outlining a constellation he didn't recognize from his astronomy classes. The pattern seemed to pulse with meaning, though Oliver couldn't begin to decipher what message the centaur was conveying. When the centaur lowered its arm, Oliver found his voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper. "I don't understand." The centaur made no response. It simply continued to gaze at Oliver with those ancient, star-reflecting eyes. Then, with a gentleness that seemed impossible for such a massive being, it inclined its head in the barest suggestion of a nod. A soft breeze whispered through the clearing, carrying with it the distant sound of the castle bell signaling dinner. The familiar sound broke the spell of the moment, and Oliver realized how late it had grown. "I should go," he said softly, though he felt strangely reluctant to leave this mysterious encounter. The centaur made no move to stop him, but as Oliver took a step backward, the creature once more raised its gaze to the stars, then back to Oliver, as if imparting a silent reminder. "The stars," Oliver murmured. "I'll remember to look at the stars." With that, he turned and made his way back to the forest's edge, feeling the weight of the centaur's gaze on his back the entire way. Only when he emerged from beneath the canopy of trees did he dare to look back. The clearing was empty. The silver-backed centaur had vanished as silently as it had appeared, leaving no trace of its presence. Oliver might have convinced himself he'd imagined the whole encounter, if not for a single silver hair clinging to his robe sleeve, gleaming in the growing moonlight. As he walked back across the grounds toward the warm glow of Hogwarts, Oliver felt changed in some subtle, indefinable way. The encounter had left him with a sense of having been chosen, though for what purpose he couldn't say. The memory of the centaur's gaze, ancient and knowing, stayed with him, along with the pattern it had traced among the stars. That night, after the dormitory had grown quiet with the soft breathing of his sleeping housemates, Oliver crept to the window. Pushing it open, he leaned out into the cool night air and tilted his head up to the heavens. The sky was remarkably clear, with thousands of stars scattered across the velvety darkness like diamond dust. His eyes searched for the pattern the centaur had shown him. It took some time, but eventually he found it. A collection of stars that seemed to form a shape like a doorway or archway. As he gazed at it, Oliver felt a curious lightness in his head, as though he were floating upward, closer to those distant points of light. When sleep finally claimed him, his dreams were unlike any he had experienced before. He floated among the stars, witnessing their slow, graceful dance across the cosmos. Constellations formed and unraveled before him, telling stories in a language that needed no words. He saw events that had occurred centuries ago and glimpsed possibilities that had not yet come to pass, all written in the timeless language of starlight. Throughout it all, a silent guide accompanied him, the silver-backed centaur, its presence a constant comfort as Oliver navigated the vastness of the celestial realm. When morning came, Oliver awoke feeling more rested than he had in months, despite the unusual nature of his dreams. As he went about his day, attending classes, completing assignments, practicing Quidditch, he carried with him a sense of calm awareness, as though he now viewed the world through slightly different eyes. That night, and many nights after, the dreams continued. Each evening before sleep, Oliver would gaze at the stars, finding the doorway constellation, and each night his dreams would carry him through that doorway into the cosmic dance. Sometimes the silver-bagged centaur would lead him to specific constellations, showing him ancient stories played out in stellar patterns. Other times, they would simply drift together through the starlit void, observers to the grand movements of the universe. Never did the centaur speak, and strangely, Oliver never felt the need for words. Understanding flowed between them in currents deeper than language. During the day, Oliver began to notice subtle changes in himself. His awareness seemed heightened, not just of his surroundings, but of the people around him. He could sense the underlying rhythms of their moods and thoughts, the invisible connections that bound them together. In divination class, Professor Trelawney remarked on his suddenly improved intuition, though Oliver couldn't explain how he knew which card would be drawn next, or why certain tea leaf patterns seemed so obvious to him now. A week after his encounter, Oliver found himself once again walking near the edge of the forbidden forest. He hadn't planned to return, but his feet seemed to carry him there of their own accord. The day was overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain, yet, as he approached the spot where he had met the centaur, a single shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the moss-covered stone where his quill had rested. Oliver sat on the stone, not entirely sure why he had come or what he was waiting for. He simply felt drawn to this place where the ordinary world and something deeper had momentarily overlapped. As he sat in contemplative silence, he became aware of the forest's subtle symphony, the soft conversation of leaves in the breeze, the distant tap of a woodpecker, the whispered secrets of small creatures moving through underbrush. It was as though the forest itself was speaking in a language just beyond his comprehension. The gentle patter of raindrops began to fall, but strangely, none seemed to touch Oliver. Looking up, he was startled to find the silverback centaur standing silently nearby, its massive form somehow having approached without making a sound. Today, in the diffused daylight, its silver markings seemed to contain subtle blues and purples, shifting like oil on water. "You came back," Oliver said softly. The centaur inclined its head slightly, those ancient eyes regarding Oliver with what might have been approval. It made a gesture with one hand, palm up, as if offering something invisible. "The dreams," Oliver said, understanding somehow. "You've been sending me the dreams of stars." The centaur's expression remained unchanged, but Oliver sensed a confirmation in its steadiness. "Way me?" he asked. For the first time, something like a smile touched the centaur's solemn face. It gestured toward Oliver's pocket, where his silver-tipped quill resided. "Because I lost my quill?" Oliver asked, puzzled. The centaur shook its head slowly, then pointed first to the quill, then to Oliver's heart, and finally to the sky, partially visible through the forest canopy despite the light rainfall. Understanding dawned on Oliver, though he couldn't have explained it in words. It wasn't about the quill itself, but about Oliver's nature, his appreciation for quiet moments, his attention to the small wonders that others overlooked, his openness to the language of silence. The centaur had recognized in him a kindred spirit, someone who could learn to read the ancient stories written in starlight. "I'm honored," Oliver said simply. The centaur nodded once, then turned its gaze upward as a break in the clouds revealed a patch of blue sky. Though it was daytime and no stars were visible, Oliver knew the centaur was looking at where certain stars would be, reading messages invisible to ordinary eyes. When it looked back to Oliver, the centaur's expression had grown serious. It knelt down, bringing its towering form closer to Oliver's level, a gesture that somehow conveyed both respect and urgency. From around its neck, it removed a simple leather cord on which hung a small crystal that captured and refracted the available light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the forest floor. Oliver felt a strange... The centaur held the crystal out to Oliver, who hesitantly accepted it. The moment the crystal touched his palm, Oliver felt a surge of connection, as though invisible threads were linking him to the stars even in daylight, to the ancient wisdom of the forest, and to the silent being before him. "Thank you," he whispered, carefully placing the cord around his own neck. The crystal rested against his chest, warm and somehow alive against his skin. The centaur rose to its full height once more and placed a hand briefly on Oliver's shoulder, a touch as light as a falling leaf despite the massive size of its hand. Then, with silent grace, it turned and moved deeper into the forest, its silver-marked form quickly disappearing among the shadows and mist. Oliver remained for a while longer, feeling the weight of the crystal against his chest and the lingering warmth of the centaur's touch on his shoulder. Eventually, the increasing rainfall reminded him to return to the castle, but he carried with him a sense of having been entrusted with something precious and important. That night, before retiring to bed, Oliver held the crystal in his palm as he gazed out at the stars. The constellation doorway seemed brighter than before, and as he fell asleep, his journey into the stars felt more vivid, more real than even his waking hours had been. The silver-backed centaur was waiting for him among the celestial bodies, but this time, their journey took them to a particular cluster of stars that formed what looked like an ancient tree. As Oliver watched, the stellar tree seemed to come alive, its branches reaching outward, connecting to other star patterns in an ever-expanding network that pulsed with light and meaning. The centaur guided him closer, and Oliver understood that he was being shown the interconnectedness of all things, how each star, each living being, each moment was part of a vast cosmic tapestry, beautiful in its complexity, yet elegantly simple in its fundamental nature. When he awoke the next morning, Oliver carried this understanding with him, seeing the Great Hall not just as a room full of students, but as a constellation of souls, each connected to the others in ways visible and invisible. Even Professor Snape, with his perpetual scowl and cutting remarks, appeared to Oliver as part of this grand pattern, his harshness a product of his own unique journey through the cosmic dance. Days turned into weeks, and Oliver's nightly journeys among the stars continued. The crystal the centaur had given him seemed to enhance his dreams, allowing him to perceive ever deeper layers of the cosmic wisdom. He began keeping a journal, using his silver-tipped quill to record not just the patterns of stars he was shown, but also the insights that came to him during his celestial wanderings. Sometimes, during particularly clear nights, Oliver would sit by the window in the common room long after his housemates had gone to bed, gazing up at the stars and feeling the gentle pulse of the crystal against his chest. On one such night, as autumn was giving way to winter and the first frost had begun to edge the window panes with delicate patterns, he became aware of a presence behind him. Turning, he found Luna Lovegood, a second year known for her peculiar perspectives and dreamy demeanor. She was watching him with her large, curious eyes, her head tilted slightly to one side. "You've been touched by them too, haven't you?" she asked in her soft, matter-of-fact voice. The stargazers. Oliver was startled. "You know about the centaurs?" Luna nodded, coming to sit beside him at the window. "Not the ordinary centaurs that live in the forest. The ancient ones. The ones that remember when the stars were young." She glanced at the crystal hanging from Oliver's neck. "They don't show themselves to just anyone. Have you seen one?" Oliver asked. Luna's gaze drifted to the window, to the star-filled sky beyond. "Not in the way you have, but I feel them sometimes, especially on nights when the moon is new and the stars are at their brightest." She looked back at him. "What do they show you?" Oliver hesitated, unsure how to articulate experiences that transcended ordinary language. "Stories," he said finally. "Connections, patterns that have always been there but that most of us never notice." Luna nodded as though this confirmed something she had long suspected. "The hidden language," she said. "That's what my mother called it. She studied it too before." She trailed off, but Oliver understood. Luna's mother had died when she was young, a piece of common knowledge at Hogwarts. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Luna's smile was tinged with a gentle sadness. "It's all right. She's part of the pattern now, just in a different way." She reached out and briefly touched the crystal around Oliver's neck. "They chose well with you. You have kind eyes, patient eyes." Before Oliver could respond, Luna had stood up, her movement as light and graceful as a drift of smoke. "Good night, Oliver. Enjoy your star stories." And with that she was gone, disappearing up the stairs to the girls' dormitory, leaving Oliver to wonder at this unexpected connection. As winter wrapped Hogwarts in its cold embrace, Oliver's dreams continued to evolve. The silver-backed centaur now took him beyond the stars into the very fabric of time itself. He witnessed the birth of stars and their eventual transformation into other celestial bodies. He saw the slow, grand movements of galaxies and the delicate dance of quantum particles, understanding somehow that they were reflections of the same cosmic patterns, just at different scales. During his waking hours, Oliver found his perception increasingly altered. He could sense the ebb and flow of emotions in the great hall during meals, could almost see the invisible threads that connected certain students to others, friendships, rivalries, unspoken attractions, all forming a complex web of human connection that mirrored the cosmic patterns he observed in his dreams. His professors noticed the change in him as well. Professor Flitwick commented on his improved concentration during charms class. Professor McGonagall raised an eyebrow at his suddenly intuitive understanding of transfiguration principles. Even Professor Trelawney, normally given to dramatic predictions of doom, grew quiet and thoughtful when Oliver precisely interpreted a particularly complex arrangement of celestial bodies on her star chart, an interpretation that differed from the textbook, but that she, after careful consideration, deemed possibly more accurate than the traditional view. As the winter solstice approached, the longest night of the year, Oliver sensed a building anticipation in his dreams. The silver-backed centaur seemed to be preparing him for something, though what exactly, Oliver couldn't say. Their journeys among the stars grew more focused, returning repeatedly to certain patterns and formations, as though there were a lesson the centaur particularly wanted him to grasp. The night of the solstice itself was clear and bitterly cold, the sky a vast, dark expanse glittering with countless stars. Most students had already left for the holiday break, but Oliver had arranged to stay at Hogwarts, somehow knowing that he needed to be there for whatever the centaur was preparing him to experience. Luna had stayed as well, one of the few students remaining in the nearly empty castle. She found Oliver in the common room that evening, the crystal held in his palm, its facets catching and refracting the firelight. "Tonight's the night, isn't it?" she asked, settling into the chair opposite him. Oliver nodded, not questioning how she knew. "I think so. Something's going to happen, but I'm not sure what." Luna reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and silver, a thimble-sized object that resembled a miniature star, its points delicate and precise. "My mother left this for me," she said, holding it out. "She said it was a key, though she never told me what it unlocked." She placed it on the table between them. "I think you might need it tonight." Oliver looked at the small silver star, then at Luna. "Are you coming with me?" She shook her head, a touch of regret in her dreamy eyes. "This journey is yours, not mine, at least not yet." She stood, her silvery blonde hair catching the firelight. "But I'll wait up for you, to hear about it, if you want to tell me." After she had gone back to her dormitory, Oliver sat for a long time, watching the fire burn down to embers. When the clock struck midnight, he felt a gentle pulse from the crystal against his chest. It was time. Wrapping himself in his warmest cloak and tucking Luna's silver star into his pocket alongside his quill, Oliver slipped out of the common room and made his way through the silent castle. He encountered no one, not even the ghosts seemed to be abroad tonight. Outside, the cold was intense, his breath forming clouds of vapor that quickly dispersed in the still air. The snow-covered ground sparkled under the starlight, an echo of the glittering sky above. Oliver didn't hesitate but walked directly toward the edge of the forbidden forest, to the spot where he had first encountered the silver-backed centaur. The forest was transformed in winter, the deciduous trees bare of leaves, the evergreens heavy with snow, the familiar paths altered by drifts of white. Yet Oliver found his way unerringly to the moss-covered stone, now blanketed in snow, where his quill had once rested. The silver-backed centaur was waiting for him, its massive form somehow even more imposing against the stark winter landscape. Tonight, its silver markings seemed to be in constant motion, flowing like quicksilver down its back, reflecting both starlight and the soft luminescence of the snow. "I'm here," Oliver said simply, his voice hushed in the winter stillness. The centaur inclined its head, then gestured with one hand toward the sky. Oliver looked up to see the doorway constellation directly overhead, more brilliant than he had ever seen it before. Each star pulsed with light, and the pattern they formed seemed to shimmer with an energy that reached down to where he stood. The centaur made another gesture, this one directed at Oliver's chest, where the crystal hung. Understanding, Oliver removed the crystal from around his neck and held it up. In the starlight, it seemed to come alive. Its facets no longer merely reflecting light, but generating it from within, sending rainbow patterns dancing across the snow. The centaur then pointed to Oliver's pocket. "The star?" Oliver asked, pulling out the small silver object Luna had given him. "What do I do with it?" The centaur made a motion as though fitting two pieces together. With careful fingers, Oliver examined both objects. The crystal had a small indentation on one side that he had never noticed before. The silver star, when he looked closely, had a protrusion that matched this indentation perfectly. Taking a deep breath, Oliver joined the two objects. They connected with a soft click, and immediately a beam of intense light shot upward from the combined items, reaching toward the doorway constellation overhead. The beam widened, forming a column of light that illuminated the clearing with an otherworldly glow. Within this column, images began to form. Stars, galaxies, cosmic dust clouds, all moving in a graceful dance that Oliver recognized from his dreams. But now he was seeing it while awake, the cosmic patterns projected all around him in the winter clearing. The silver-backed centaur stepped into the column of light, its form temporarily obscured by the swirling stellar images. When it re-emerged, it was changed, more luminous, its edges less defined, as though it were composed partly of starlight itself. For the first time, the centaur spoke, its voice deep and resonant like the distant echo of thunder, yet somehow as gentle as the first light of dawn. "Oliver Blakeney," it said, using his full name though Oliver had never introduced himself. "You have learned to see what most overlook, to hear what few listen for, to understand what many dismiss." Oliver stood transfixed, the joined crystal and star warm in his palm despite the winter cold. "The stars have stories to tell," the centaur continued. "Stories of what has been, what is, and what may yet come to pass. Few humans have the patience to learn their language, but you," its starlit gaze held Oliver's, "you have shown both the willingness and the capacity." Me?" Oliver asked again, the question that had lingered since their first encounter. "The stars chose you," the centaur said simply, "as they sometimes do. I merely recognized their choice." The centaur gestured to the column of light surrounding them, to the cosmic dance playing out in luminous detail. "Tonight, the veil between realms is at its thinnest. Tonight you may choose to step beyond mere dreams, to walk among the stars in truth." Oliver's heart raced at the implication. "You mean physically go into the stars?" The centaur's expression was solemn. "Not your physical form, but your essence, your consciousness. And not permanently, but yes, to journey among them, to learn directly from the cosmic patterns, rather than through the filter of dreams." Oliver looked up at the swirling images around them, at the doorway constellation that now seemed to be opening, expanding into an actual portal of light directly above them. Part of him was afraid. This was far beyond anything he had anticipated, but a deeper part, the part that had been changed by his dreams and by the centaur's quiet wisdom, felt ready. Prepared. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Hold the key," the centaur said, nodding to the joined crystal and star in Oliver's hand. "Focus your mind on the doorway above. Let yourself rise, like a thought drifting upward." Oliver closed his eyes, clutching the warm objects in his palm, and concentrated on the doorway constellation. he felt a curious lightness begin to spread through his body, starting from his chest and flowing outward to his limbs. The winter cold receded, replaced by a gentle warmth that reminded him of summer afternoons by the lake. When he opened his eyes, he was floating, rising slowly through the column of light toward the stellar portal above. The silver-backed centaur remained on the ground below, growing smaller as Oliver ascended, yet somehow still present beside him, guiding him upward. As he approached the doorway of stars, Oliver felt a moment of hesitation, a natural fear of the unknown. But the centaur's presence reassured him, and the crystal and star in his hand pulsed with comforting warmth. Taking a deep breath that wasn't quite physical, Oliver passed through the portal. What followed was beyond anything his dreams had prepared him for. He was among the stars now, not as an observer but as a participant in their grand cosmic dance. He could feel the gentle gravitational tugs, the subtle radiations of energy, the slow, majestic movements of celestial bodies that had been ongoing for billions of years. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. Oliver felt as though he spent eons drifting among nebulae, watching the birth of new stars from cosmic dust, yet also sensed that only moments were passing in the winter clearing below. Throughout this incredible journey, the silver-backed centaur was his guide, its form now fully composed of starlight, moving with him through the cosmic expanse. It showed him patterns and connections that made his previous understanding seem rudimentary by comparison. He learned how events on Earth were reflected in stellar arrangements, how the movements of planets and stars influenced the subtle energies of the world below, not through the simplified mechanisms proposed by astrology, but through complex interconnected patterns that human science had barely begun to comprehend. Most profoundly, Oliver began to understand his own place within this vast cosmic tapestry. Not insignificant despite the scale, but an integral part of the pattern, connected to all other parts in ways both subtle and profound. When it was time to return, Oliver felt a gentle tug from the crystal and star in his hand, guiding him back toward the portal. He passed through it with a sense of both regret and fulfillment, floating down through the column of light to the snow-covered clearing below. As his consciousness fully returned to his body, Oliver became aware once more of the winter cold, though it seemed less biting than before. The silver-backed centaur stood before him, its form gradually returning to its more solid state, though its silver markings continued to flow and shift like liquid starlight. "What happens now?" Oliver asked, his voice soft in the winter stillness. "You return to your life," the centaur said, "but changed. You carry the stars within you now, their wisdom accessible not just in dreams, but in your waking hours as well." Oliver looked down at the joined crystal and star in his palm, still glowing softly. "And these? Keep them. They are yours now. Tools to help you maintain your connection to what you have experienced tonight. On future solstices, or when the stars align in particular patterns, you may use them to journey again, if you wish." The centaur's expression grew more serious. "But remember, with wisdom comes responsibility. The knowledge of the stars is not meant to elevate you above others, but to help you guide them, to share the light when darkness threatens." Oliver nodded, feeling the weight of this trust. "I understand. And one day," the centaur continued, "you will find others who can see what you see, hear what you hear. The silver-hailed one has already begun her journey, though along a different path than yours." "Luna," Oliver said, understanding. The centaur inclined its head. "There will be others, too, in time. Each with their own connection to the cosmic patterns, each with their own role to play. The column of light was beginning to fade now, the images of stars and galaxies growing dimmer as the joined crystal and star cooled in Oliver's hands. The doorway constellation overhead was returning to its normal appearance, the portal closing until the next alignment. "Will I see you again?" Oliver asked. The centaur's expression softened into what might have been a smile. "I am never far from those who can read the language of stars. Look for me in your dreams, in the patterns of light through leaves, in the quiet moments between thoughts." With that, the centaur turned and moved silently into the forest, its silver-marked form quickly disappearing among the snow-laden trees. The column of light faded completely, leaving Oliver alone in the clearing, the only illumination now coming from the stars overhead and the soft glow of the snow. As he made his way back to the castle, Oliver felt both tremendously tired and incredibly awake, his mind still processing the vastness of what he had experienced. The crystal and star, now separated once more, rested one in his palm and one in his pocket, both still faintly warm despite the winter cold. Luna was waiting for him in the common room, curled in an armchair by the dying embers of the fire. She looked up as he entered, her eyes searching his face. "You went," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Oliver nodded, taking the chair opposite her. "Your mother's star, it was exactly what I needed. Thank you." Luna smiled, a genuine expression of happiness. "I knew it would be. She always said it was waiting for the right moment." She leaned forward slightly. "What was it like, if you want to tell me?" As the night deepened toward dawn, Oliver shared with Luna what he had experienced, the journey through the stars, the wisdom the centaur had shown him, the profound sense of connection to the cosmic dance. She listened with her characteristic blend of dreamy attention and sharp perception, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own deep understanding of the hidden patterns in the world. When he had finished, Luna was quiet for a moment, absently twirling a strand of her silvery hair around one finger. "We're not so alone as people think, are we?" she said finally. "Not when there's so much out there, so many layers to what's real." "No," Oliver agreed, "not alone at all." They sat in companionable silence until the first pale light of dawn began to illuminate the common room. Eventually, Luna uncurled from her chair and stood, stretching like a cat. "I'm going to watch the sunrise," she announced, "from the astronomy tower. Would you like to come?" Oliver considered the invitation. He was tired, certainly, after his extraordinary night, but the thought of watching the first light of day spread across the snow-covered grounds, perhaps seeing the stars fade one by one into the brightening sky, held a certain appeal. "Yes," he said, rising from his chair. "I'd like that." Together they made their way through the silent castle to the astronomy tower, climbing the spiral staircase to emerge onto the observation platform, just as the eastern sky was beginning to blush with the first hint of sunrise. The air was crisp and clear, the world below them a study in white and blue shadow. As they watched, the sun's edge appeared above the horizon, sending long golden rays across the landscape, turning the snow from blue to rose to brilliant white. Oliver felt the crystal warm slightly against his chest, responding to the sun's light, just as it had to the stars. Looking up, he could still see a few of the brightest stars, including those that formed part of the doorway constellation, gradually fading as the sky brightened. Standing there with Luna, watching night transform into day, Oliver felt a profound sense of peace. The knowledge he had gained among the stars was still with him, but now integrated into his understanding of the world, a foundation upon which to build rather than a separate, dreamlike reality. When the sun had fully risen, they made their way back down the tower and toward the great hall, where the few remaining students and staff would be gathering for breakfast. The day ahead promised to be ordinary in many ways: meals, conversations, perhaps some reading or a walk in the snow. But Oliver knew that even these mundane activities would be illuminated by what he had learned, by the cosmic patterns he could now perceive underlying all of existence. And later, when night fell once more, he would look up at the stars with new eyes, reading their ancient language and finding in their light not just beauty, but meaning. The silver-backed centaur had given him a gift beyond measure, a way of seeing that transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary, that revealed the magic hidden in plain sight all around. And while his friends and classmates might never fully understand the change in him, he would carry this wisdom forward, a quiet keeper of star knowledge in a world that had largely forgotten how to look up and truly see. As he took his seat at the breakfast table, Oliver's hand brushed against his pocket, feeling the reassuring presence of his silver-tipped quill and Luna's star-shaped key. Tonight he would write down what he had learned, adding another page to the journal of his cosmic education. And perhaps someday those words would help another young wizard or witch who found themselves drawn to the silent language of the stars, who felt the pull of mysteries that waited just beyond the edge of the familiar world. For now, though, he was content to simply be a student at Hogwarts, a friend to Luna, a seeker of quiet wonders, and a reader of stars. It was, he reflected as he reached for a piece of toast, quite enough wonder for one lifetime.
And somewhere in the Forbidden Forest, watching the same sunrise from beneath ancient boughs, the silver-backed centaur raised its face to the morning light, sensing the subtle shift in the cosmic tapestry that Oliver's journey had created. A good beginning, it thought, for a story that would continue to unfold across many nights, beneath countless stars, in dreams and waking both. A worthy addition to the ancient, ongoing conversation between earth and sky, between creature and cosmos, between what is seen and what is hidden, just beyond ordinary sight.
The dance continued, as it always had, as it always would, with a new participant now aware of its rhythms, its patterns, its quiet, luminous magic. The rain had been falling gently all day, a soft, persistent drizzle that coated Hogwarts in a glistening sheen. From her window in Ravenclaw Tower, Eliza Thornfield watched droplets trace lazy patterns down the glass. The grounds below transformed into a watercolor painting of greys and greens. Most students complained about rainy days, but Eliza found them soothing, the perfect backdrop for reading or quiet contemplation. As evening approached, the rain finally began to taper off, and Eliza decided to venture out for a walk before curfew. She loved the way the world smelled after rainfall, clean and renewed, with the castle grounds exhaling earthy scents that couldn't be captured in any potion or charm. Wrapping herself in a blue cardigan and slipping her wand into her pocket, Eliza made her way down the spiral staircase and through the Ravenclaw common room. A few of her housemates glanced up from their books and chess games, eyebrows raised at the idea of going outside after such a dreary day. But Eliza merely smiled. They were used to her solitary wanderings by now. The corridors of Hogwarts were quiet, most students having retreated to their common rooms or the library as dusk settled over the castle. Eliza's footsteps echoed softly against the stone floors as she made her way down to the entrance hall. Through the great oak doors, she could smell the fresh, rain-soaked air calling to her. Stepping outside, Eliza took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the evening's coolness. The grounds glistened in the fading light, every blade of grass adorned with crystal droplets. The rain had indeed stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds, creating a soft, diffused glow as the sun began its descent. Eliza followed the path that led down toward the lake, her shoes leaving temporary impressions in the damp earth. All around her, the ground seemed to have been transformed by the day's rainfall. Colors appeared more vibrant, the greens deeper, the flowers more pronounced in their hues. Even the ancient stones of the castle behind her seemed to have been cleansed, their weathered faces refreshed by nature's gentle washing. As she walked, Eliza's thoughts drifted to the essay she was working on for Professor Flitwick's charms class, a comparison of weather-influencing spells and their ethical applications. Perhaps that was why she felt particularly drawn to experiencing the aftermath of natural rainfall. There was something pure about weather that came without magical interference. Lost in these musings, Eliza almost didn't notice when her path began to veer closer to the edge of the forbidden forest than she had intended. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their leaves still dripping from the day's shower, creating a gentle percussion that filled the air around her. Eliza paused, knowing she should probably turn back toward the more frequented areas of the grounds. The forest was off limits to students for good reason, home to creatures and magics that could be unpredictable and dangerous. Yet something about the forest's edge today seemed welcoming rather than forbidding, the usual sense of vague menace replaced by a tranquil invitation. Just a little closer, she whispered to herself, drawn by curiosity and the ethereal beauty of the rain-drenched woods. As she approached the tree line, Eliza noticed something unusual. A faint glow was emanating from just within the first few trees, a soft, pulsing light that seemed to hover near the ground. It wasn't bright or harsh like a spell might be, but gentle and organic, like the light of fireflies or glowworms. Portia momentarily warred with curiosity in her mind. As a Ravenclaw, however, the pull of the unknown almost always won out. Drawing her wand, more for comfort than from any sense of immediate danger, Eliza stepped carefully into the forest's edge. The canopy above filtered what remained of the day's light, creating a dappled, dreamy atmosphere. Droplets continued to fall from the leaves above, landing with soft plops on the forest floor and occasionally on Eliza's head and shoulders. The air here was different, thicker somehow, laden with the sense of moss, bark, and something else, something earthy and pleasant that she couldn't quite identify. Following the mysterious glow, Eliza made her way carefully between the trees, mindful of roots and fallen branches. The light seemed to be coming from a small clearing just ahead, its source still hidden from view. When she finally pushed aside a low-hanging branch and stepped into the clearing, Eliza gasped softly in wonder. Before her, arranged in a perfect circle, was a ring of mushrooms. But not ordinary mushrooms. These were unlike any she had ever seen in herbology class or in the illustrations of her textbooks. Each one stood about as tall as her hand, with caps the color of cream tinged with the faintest blue, and they emitted a gentle, pulsating glow that cast the clearing in a warm, ethereal light. Eliza knelt down at the edge of the circle, careful not to disturb it. She knew enough about magical plants to understand that fungi rings often held significant magic, sometimes marking fairy paths or places where the veil between worlds grew thin. This ring, however, felt less like a warning and more like an invitation. As she leaned closer, Eliza noticed something even more remarkable. Etched into the cap of each mushroom were tiny symbols, not quite like any runes she had studied, but similar enough that she felt she might understand them if she looked long enough. The symbols seemed to shift subtly as she observed them, almost as if they were rearranging themselves under her gaze. "What are you trying to tell me?" she whispered, not really expecting an answer. To her surprise, The glow of the mushrooms intensified briefly at the sound of her voice, then settled back into its gentle rhythm. Eliza's heart quickened. The fungi were responding to her, or at least to sound. Drawing on her knowledge of magical plants, Eliza recalled that certain enchanted species responded differently depending on how they were approached. Some plants withered if spoken to harshly, while others bloomed more brilliantly when treated with kindness. "Hello," she said softly, her voice gentle and warm. "You're quite beautiful. I've never seen mushrooms like you before." Again, the glow pulsed, slightly stronger this time, and Eliza noticed the symbols on the caps shifting more rapidly. Encouraged, she continued to speak in the same gentle tone, sharing idle thoughts about her day, her studies, the rainfall. With each word spoken in kindness, the mushrooms seemed to respond, their light growing warmer and the symbols moving more purposefully. After several minutes of this one-sided conversation, Eliza noticed something changing. The symbols were no longer shifting randomly. They were aligning, forming patterns that began to look like actual letters. Not in any alphabet she recognized at first, but then gradually morphing into something closer to English. Fascinated, Eliza carefully moved around the circle, reading aloud the emerging letters she could see on each mushroom cap. ENEATH, Eathaste, SURWFACH. As she completed the circle, reading each mushroom in turn with the same gentle voice, the message became clear. Beneath the surface lies truth, within silence speaks wisdom, through kindness blooms magic. The moment she spoke the final word, the entire ring of mushrooms pulsed with light, illuminating the clearing with a warm glow that reminded Eliza of sunlight filtering through honey. The sensation that accompanied this light was extraordinary, a feeling of warmth and reassurance that spread from her chest outward, as if she had just been embraced by an old friend. Eliza sat back on her heels, a smile spreading across her face. The message itself was beautiful, but the feeling it evoked was the true gift, a sense of belonging, of being precisely where she was meant to be in that moment. As the glow subsided to its previous gentle pulsing, Eliza noticed something else. From within the mushroom ring, tiny tendrils of light were emerging, like luminous roots stretching outward across the forest floor. They moved slowly, deliberately, creating intricate patterns that reminded her of constellations or the diagrams in her ancient runes textbook. Following an impulse she didn't quite understand, Eliza gently placed her palm on the ground near one of these light tendrils. The tendril responded immediately, curving toward her hand, not quite touching but mirroring its shape, as if acknowledging her presence. "Thank you," she whispered to the mushroom ring, feeling strangely certain that gratitude was appropriate. In response, the nearest mushroom tilted slightly in her direction, its cap dipping in what could only be described as a bow. Eliza laughed softly, delighted by this unexpected interaction. She had always believed that the magical world contained more wonders than even wizards understood, but this encounter felt special, something not mentioned in any of her textbooks or lectures. As she sat there simply enjoying the presence of the luminous fungi, Eliza became aware of other subtle changes in the clearing. The moss beneath her seemed to have grown more vibrant, tiny dewdrops collecting on its surface reflecting the mushroom's light. The air felt different too, charged somehow, but in a pleasant way, like the atmosphere after a particularly successful charm. A rustle in the underbrush startled her, and Eliza turned to see a small creature watching her from between the roots of a nearby tree. It was a bowtruckle, its twig-like body nearly invisible against the forest floor, except for its curious eyes that reflected the mushroom's glow. "Hello there," Eliza said softly, remaining very still so as not to frighten the shy creature. Did you come to see the mushrooms too? The bowtruckle tilted its head, regarding her with what seemed like surprise, then slowly emerged from its hiding place. With cautious movements, it approached the edge of the mushroom ring, then looked to Eliza as if asking permission. I think they're friendly, she encouraged. The tiny creature stepped carefully into the circle, and immediately the mushroom's glow intensified once more, the light tendrils on the ground shifting to create a small illuminated path that led straight to the bowtruckle. The creature chirped with what sounded like delight, following the path of light and stopping at the center of the ring. There, something remarkable began to happen. A single droplet of what looked like liquid light gathered at the top of the central mushroom, trembling for a moment before falling directly onto the bowtruckle. Rather than harming it, the droplet appeared to be absorbed, causing the creature to glow briefly with the same warm light as the fungi. The bowtruckle chirped again, this time in what was unmistakably gratitude, and scurried back to the edge of the ring, pausing near Eliza's knee to look up at her with newfound recognition before disappearing once more into the underbrush. What was that? Eliza whispered, not really expecting an answer. What did you give it? To her surprise, the symbols on the mushroom caps began to shift again, eventually forming a new message that she read aloud. Healing for those who ask with no words, strength for those who need but cannot seek. Eliza's mind raced with the implications. These mushrooms weren't just beautiful or communicative. They were providing some kind of aid to the forest creatures. Perhaps they served as a natural source of healing, or magic for beings that couldn't access other forms of help. This thought made her appreciate the mushroom ring even more. It wasn't merely a curiosity or a pretty magical phenomenon. It was serving a purpose, quietly contributing to the well-being of the forest's inhabitants without recognition or reward. As the evening deepened around her, Eliza knew she should return to the castle soon. Curfew would be approaching, and while she had a valid excuse for being on the grounds, being found at the forest's edge might be more difficult to explain. I should go, she said regretfully to the mushroom ring. But I'll come back to visit you, if that's all right. The glow pulsed once, which Eliza chose to interpret as agreement. As she stood to leave, brushing bits of moss and earth from her robes, the mushrooms shifted their message one last time. Reading the symbols aloud, Eliza found herself smiling at their farewell. The forest remembers those who walk with gentle steps and speak with kind words. Return when rain has blessed the earth again. I will, she promised, feeling as though she had made friends with the forest itself. With a last look at the luminous circle, Eliza turned and made her way back through the trees toward the open grounds of Hogwarts. The castle windows glowed warmly in the distance, but somehow the light didn't seem as inviting as the gentle pulse of the mushroom ring behind her. As she emerged from the forest's edge, Eliza realized that twilight had deepened into early evening. The clouds had partially cleared, revealing patches of star-scattered sky. A crescent moon hung low, casting a silver glow that complemented the golden light still emanating from the windows of Hogwarts. Walking back toward the castle, Eliza felt changed in some subtle way. The mushroom's message echoed in her mind. Beneath the surface lies truth. Within silence speaks wisdom. Through kindness blooms magic. It seemed to apply not just to the forest or to magical fungi, but to life at Hogwarts, to her studies, to her interactions with others. How much, she wondered, did she miss by not looking beneath the surface? How much wisdom was there to be found in the moments of silence between spells and incantations? And how much more magical could her world become if approached with consistent kindness? These thoughts accompanied her all the way back to the castle, where she slipped through the great oak doors just as the evening bell tolled, signaling the approach of curfew. The entrance hall was nearly empty, with just a few students hurrying toward their respective common rooms. "Cutting it close, Miss Thornfield?" remarked the familiar voice of Professor Flitwick, who was crossing the hall with a stack of books floating obediently behind him. "Sorry, Professor," Eliza replied. "I was out walking after the rain and lost track of time." The diminutive charms professor nodded understandingly. "The grounds are particularly lovely after rainfall, are they not? Did you find any inspiration for your essay on weather charms?" Eliza smiled. "I think I did, Professor, though perhaps not in the way I expected. The best inspiration often comes that way," he said with a knowing smile. "Now, best be on your way to Ravenclaw Tower before Mr. Filch begins his rounds." As Eliza climbed the moving staircases toward her common room, she realized she wasn't sure whether to share her discovery with anyone else. Part of her wanted to keep the mushroom ring a secret, a special place known only to her. Another part wondered if Professor Sprout or even Professor Flitwick might find it valuable for their research. By the time she reached the bronze eagle knocker that guarded the entrance to Ravenclaw Tower, Eliza had decided to keep the knowledge to herself, at least for now. The mushrooms had shared their message with her, and something about the encounter felt personal, as if the forest had chosen to reveal this small wonder specifically for her to find. The eagle knocker stirred as she approached, its metal eyes gleaming in the torchlight. "What grows when shared, yet diminishes when kept to oneself?" it asked. Its voice resonant. Eliza smiled, the answer coming easily to her mind after her evening's experience. "Kindness," she replied. Thoughtfully answered, the knocker acknowledged, and the door swung open to admit her. The Ravenclaw common room was as she had left it. Students gathered in small groups around tables laden with books and parchment, others relaxing in the comfortable blue armchairs that dotted the circular space. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over everything and complementing the starlight that streamed in through the arched windows. Eliza's friend Amara looked up from her astronomy chart as Eliza entered. "There you are. I was beginning to think you'd decided to sleep under the stars tonight." "I wasn't far off," Eliza admitted, settling into the armchair opposite her friend. "The grounds were beautiful after the rain." "Only you would find joy in getting soaked," Amara teased, turning her attention back to her chart. "Pass me the star guide, would you? I can't remember if Cassiopeia is visible this month or not." As Eliza handed over the requested book, she noticed a small smudge of luminous material on her fingertips, a residue from the forest floor near the mushroom ring. In the firelight, it was barely visible, but when she turned her hand slightly away from the fire's glow, she could see it emitting its own faint light, a subtle reminder of her extraordinary encounter. Smiling secretly to herself, Eliza settled into the comfortable routine of evening study with her housemates, the mushroom's message tucked away in her heart like a cherished gift. Over the next few days, Eliza found herself drawn repeatedly to the window seats in the common room or the castle's many towers, watching the sky for signs of rain. The mushroom's parting message had been clear. She was to return when rain had blessed the earth again, and she was eager to honor this request. Hogwarts in early autumn, however, proved surprisingly dry. The week passed with nothing more than occasional wispy clouds scudding across an otherwise clear blue sky. While most students celebrated the fine weather, Eliza found herself uncharacteristically impatient for the return of rain. Her classes provided some distraction. In herbology, As Professor Sprout lectured on the properties of various fungi, Eliza paid particularly close attention, hoping for some mention of luminous, communicative mushrooms. To her disappointment, nothing in the curriculum seemed to match what she had encountered. "Professor," she asked after class, helping to stack the pots they had used for repotting screech snaps, "are there fungi that can communicate with wizards?" Professor Sprout paused, adjusting her patched hat thoughtfully. "Communicate? Well, there are some species that react to magical stimuli. Chinese chomping mushrooms, for instance, respond to certain spells by, well, chomping, and spotted thought spores release their spores when exposed to intense concentration. Why do you ask, dear?" "Just curious," Eliza replied, not quite ready to reveal her discovery. "I was reading about fairy rings in the library and wondered how magical they really are." "Ah, fairy rings!" Professor Sprout's eyes lit up. "Yes, those can indeed be magical under certain circumstances. Some mark places where magical energy naturally gathers, often related to ley lines or old enchantments. The fungi themselves act as conduits or indicators of this magic rather than sources." She patted Eliza's shoulder. "If you're interested in magical mycology, I have some books you might enjoy. It's a fascinating field, if somewhat overlooked." Olai thanked her professor and accepted the book recommendations, her curiosity only deepening. If Professor Sprout, with all her expertise in magical plants, didn't immediately recognize what Eliza was describing, perhaps the mushroom ring truly was something unusual. Finally, 10 days after her initial encounter, the weather began to change. Heavy clouds rolled in from the north, bringing with them a chill wind that promised rain. By the time Eliza woke on Saturday morning, a steady drizzle was falling, painting the windows of Ravenclaw Tower with glistening streaks. Perfect, she thought, dressing quickly in warm clothes and a waterproof cloak. Breakfast could wait. The mushroom ring couldn't. The grounds were nearly deserted as Eliza made her way toward the forest's edge. Most students had elected to remain in the warmth and dryness of the castle on such a dreary weekend morning. This suited Eliza perfectly, allowing her to approach the tree line without curious eyes wandering about her destination. The forest felt different in the rain, even more alive somehow, with every leaf and branch participating in the gentle symphony of falling water. Droplets gathered on the ends of pine needles before falling to the forest floor, creating a constant, soothing patter all around her. The scent was intoxicating. Fresh rain mingling with earth, bark, and decaying leaves, creating an aroma no perfumer could ever hope to capture. Retracing her steps as best she could remember, Eliza made her way to the small clearing where she had found the mushroom ring. To her delight, it was still there, but changed in subtle ways that confirmed its magical nature. The mushrooms had grown larger, their caps now the size of saucers, and their glow was stronger, more vibrant in the dim light of the rainy morning. The circle itself had expanded slightly, as if to accommodate their growth, and the ground within the ring was covered in a carpet of luminous moss that hadn't been there during her first visit. "Hello again," Eliza said softly, kneeling at the edge of the circle. "I came back as promised with the rain." Immediately, the mushrooms pulsed with light, their glow intensifying as if in greeting. The symbols on their caps began to shift, eventually forming words that Eliza read aloud. "The faithful return is honored. The circle welcomes the gentle heart." Eliza smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, despite the cool, damp air around her. "Thank you. I've been hoping for rain all week so I could visit you again." The symbol shifted once more. "The rain brings life to us, as your words bring understanding. Both are gifts freely given." This response intrigued Eliza. Do you mean you need the rain to survive or to communicate? To thrive, came the answer, glowing on the mushroom caps. To reach beyond our roots, to touch the wider world. Eliza settled more comfortably on the damp forest floor, not minding the moisture that seeped into her cloak. What are you, exactly? I've never read about mushrooms like you in any of my books. The response came slowly this time, the symbols shifting with more deliberation. We are listeners, rememberers, keepers of forest wisdom. We are what grows between worlds, in the spaces between what is spoken and what is understood. It wasn't exactly a scientific classification, Eliza thought with amusement, but it was poetic in its own way. And do you speak to everyone who finds you, or only to those who speak first with kindness? The mushrooms answered before she could complete her question. Only to those who listen for answers in silence. Only to those who seek understanding rather than use. This made sense to Eliza. She had approached the mushroom ring with curiosity and respect, speaking gently and appreciating its beauty. How differently might this encounter have gone if she had approached with the intent to harvest these unusual fungi for potions ingredients or to practice spells on them? I've been thinking about your message, she told them, about truth beneath the surface, wisdom in silence, and magic through kindness. It's beautiful. The glow pulsed warmly in response, and Eliza had the distinct impression that if mushrooms could smile, these would be beaming at her. Have you been here long? She asked. In this clearing, I mean. The symbols rearranged themselves. Time moves differently for us than for human steps. We have seen many seasons change, many creatures pass, many magics wax and wane. We remember when the castle was young stone, when the forest was young growth. Eliza's eyes widened. If what they were saying was true, these mushrooms, or at least their progenitors, had been here since Hogwarts was founded, perhaps even before. The historical implications were staggering. And in all that time, how many have you spoken to? She asked. Few, came the simple answer. Some with stars in their eyes, some with beasts in their hearts, some with questions as deep as roots. One who came with half-moon spectacles and auburn beard, who listened longest of all. Eliza caught her breath. Professor Dumbledore? You spoke with him? The name means little to us, the mushrooms responded. But yes, the one who became the castle's keeper visited us in his youth and again in his wisdom. He understood the value of listening to the quiet voices. This connection to the headmaster made Eliza feel somehow validated in her own discovery. If Dumbledore himself had found value in communing with these mysterious fungi, then perhaps her instinct to keep returning was sound. The rain continued to fall gently around them, creating a cocoon of sound that insulated the clearing from the outside world. Droplets occasionally fell through gaps in the canopy, landing on the mushroom caps and causing brief, beautiful ripples in their luminescence. As they continued their conversation, Eliza sharing stories of her life at Hogwarts and the mushrooms responding with their own forest wisdom, she became aware of movement at the edges of the clearing. Small creatures were gathering, a handful of bowtrackles, a few curious pixies hovering just out of reach, and even what appeared to be a young niffler, its dark fur slick with rain. The creatures maintained a respectful distance, watching the interaction between human and fungi with evident interest. Eliza had the impression that this was something of an event for them. Perhaps not many students took the time to sit in the rain and converse with magical mushrooms. Your friends are curious, she noted, nodding toward the assembled creatures. They sense the connection, the mushrooms replied. When understanding flows between different beings, magic gathers. They come to warm themselves in its glow. As if in confirmation, one of the bowtruckles ventured slightly closer, making a chirping sound that seemed inquiring. The mushrooms pulsed in response, and a small tendril of light extended from the ring toward the tiny creature. The bowtruckle reached out a twig-like finger to touch it, then made a sound like delighted laughter. Soon, the other creatures were approaching as well, each interacting with tendrils of light that extended from the mushroom ring. Even the niffler, typically obsessed with shiny objects, seemed more interested in the light itself than in possessing it, batting playfully at a tendril that danced just beyond its reach. "You're helping them, aren't you?" Eliza asked, remembering the droplet of light she had seen absorbed by the bowtruckle during her previous visit. "Healing them or providing something they need?" "We share what we gather," the mushrooms confirmed. "The forest gives to us, we give to its children. All is balance, all is cycle." Eliza watched in wonder as the small forest gathering continued around her. There was something profoundly moving about witnessing these interactions. Creatures that might normally avoid humans or even attack them for their treasures, all peacefully coexisting in the presence of the mushroom ring's gentle magic. After some time, during which Eliza simply observed in contented silence, the mushrooms addressed her again. "You too may receive if you wish. The forest offers gifts to those who approach with respect." "What kind of gift?" Eliza asked, curious but slightly cautious. "Understanding," came the reply. "A moment's clear sight, a glimpse beneath surfaces." Eliza considered this. She wasn't sure exactly what the mushrooms were offering, but she trusted their intentions. They had shown no signs of malevolence, and if they had indeed communicated with Dumbledore in the past without harm, she felt safe accepting their gift. "Yes," she said finally, "I would be honored." In response, the mushroom's glow intensified, concentrating particularly in the caps nearest to Eliza. Slowly, a droplet of luminous liquid formed at the edge of one cap, growing larger until it trembled on the verge of falling. When it finally detached, it didn't fall to the ground but floated through the air toward Eliza, coming to hover before her face. "Cup your hands," instructed the mushrooms. Eliza obeyed, holding her palms together to form a small bowl. The droplet descended gently into her cupped hands, where it rested like a tiny star, surprisingly warm against her skin. "Drink," the mushrooms guided. Taking a deep breath, Eliza raised her hands to her lips and allowed the droplet to slide into her mouth. It tasted of nothing she could name, something between fresh rain, morning dew, and the first breath of spring, with an undertone of earth and growth and secret things. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, gradually, Eliza began to perceive changes in her surroundings. The clearing seemed to grow more vivid, more defined, as if she were seeing it through a lens that revealed details previously hidden from her. She could suddenly distinguish individual raindrops as they fell through the canopy, tracking their journey from leaf to leaf. The moss beneath her glowed with tiny pinpricks of light that pulsed in rhythm with something she could almost hear. A deep, slow heartbeat that seemed to come from the forest itself. Most remarkably, she could see the network of fine, glowing filaments that spread beneath the soil, the mycelium that connected the mushrooms not just to each other, but to the roots of trees, to patches of moss, to seemingly every growing thing in the vicinity. The entire forest floor was alive with these connections, a vast web of communication and nutrient exchange that had been invisible to her until now. The creatures around the clearing appeared different too. Eliza could perceive glowing cores within each of them, centers of energy that pulsed with their emotions and needs. The bowtrackles glowed green with contentment, the pixies sparkled with mischievous blue energy, and the niffler emanated a curious amber light that reached out toward shiny objects, even as the creature itself remained still. "This is how you see the world," Eliza breathed, understanding dawning. "This is your perspective." "A glimpse only," the mushrooms confirmed. "The full sight would overwhelm human senses." Even this glimpse was overwhelming in its beauty and complexity. Eliza felt tears welling in her eyes at the intricate, interconnected nature of the forest life all around her. Nothing was truly separate. Everything existed in a delicate balance of giving and receiving, an endless conversation carried out in light and growth and decay. Gradually, the enhanced perception began to fade, the world slowly returning to its normal appearance. Yet something of the vision remained with Eliza, a newfound awareness of the hidden connections between things, an ability to sense the subtle exchanges of energy that she had previously overlooked. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll never see the forest, or anything else, quite the same way again." "The gift is in the seeing," the mushrooms replied, "and in remembering what has been seen." The rain had begun to ease, the steady downpour transitioning to a gentle mist that hung in the air like a veil. The creatures that had gathered around the clearing were dispersing now, returning to their hidden homes and secret paths within the forest. Eliza realized she had been in the clearing for longer than she had intended. Her classmates would be wondering where she had disappeared to, and she still had assignments to complete for Monday's classes. "I should go," she said reluctantly, "but I'll come back after the next rain, if that's all right." "The circle remains," the mushrooms assured her. "Until your return, carry this truth. The connections you have seen in the forest exist between all living things, even beyond these trees. Look for them in castle halls, in classroom corners, in silent glances and unspoken words." Eliza nodded, understanding. The mushrooms had shown her a way of perceiving that could be applied not just to nature, but to her interactions with other people as well. Perhaps she would begin to notice the invisible threads that connected student to student, professor to pupil, even human to house elf or ghost. Rising to her feet, Eliza brushed the damp earth and bits of moss from her cloak. "Thank you for sharing your wisdom with me," she said, feeling that ordinary words were inadequate for the experience she had been given. The mushrooms glowed warmly in response, their caps dipping slightly as if in a formal bow. As Eliza turned to leave, they offered one final message. "Remember, beneath the surface lies truth. Within silence speaks wisdom. Through kindness blooms magic. These are not merely words, but keys to unlock doors within and without." "I'll remember," Eliza promised. With a last look at the luminous circle, she made her way back through the trees toward the open grounds of Hogwarts. The rain had stopped completely now, and weak sunshine was beginning to break through the clouds, creating patches of golden light that dappled the wet grass. As Eliza emerged from the forest's edge, she paused to look back. From here, nothing unusual was visible among the trees, just ordinary forest shadows and the occasional glint of raindrops catching the light. The mushroom ring's magic remained hidden, a secret wonder waiting for those who approached with gentle steps and kind words. Walking back toward the castle, Eliza felt the weight of the crystal around her neck, a gift from her parents when she had first come to Hogwarts. She had always appreciated its beauty, but now, with her enhanced awareness of connections and energies, she could sense something more within it. A resonance with her own magical core, a subtle link to the loved ones who had given it to her. This new awareness extended to everything around her. The wet grass beneath her feet seemed to reach up toward her steps. The distant trees swayed, not just with the wind, but with an inner life force. Even the ancient stones of Hogwarts itself appeared more alive somehow, pulsing with the accumulated magic of centuries. As she reached the castle steps, Eliza looked up to see Professor Dumbledore standing at the entrance, his half-moon spectacles glinting in the emerging sunlight. His eyes met hers with a knowing twinkle that made her wonder if he somehow sensed where she had been. "Good morning, Miss Thornfield," he said pleasantly. "Enjoying the aftermath of the rain, I see." "Yes, Professor," Eliza replied. "The grounds are beautiful after rainfall." "Indeed they are," Dumbledore agreed, his gaze shifting briefly toward the forest's edge. "Nature has many lessons to teach us, if we approach with open eyes and respectful hearts." For a moment, Eliza wondered if she should mention the mushroom ring, to confirm if he was indeed the one with half-moon spectacles and auburn beard, who had communed with them in his youth. But something in the headmaster's gentle smile told her that no confirmation was necessary. He knew, and he was pleased that she had discovered this forest secret for herself. "The most valuable discoveries," Dumbledore added, as if reading her thoughts, "are often those we make not in textbooks or lectures, but in quiet moments of connection with the world around us." "Yes, sir," Eliza agreed. "I'm beginning to understand that." The headmaster nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Now, I believe there are fresh scones in the Great Hall that would complement a morning's exploration quite nicely." With that, he turned and disappeared into the castle, leaving Eliza smiling on the steps, the mushroom's message echoing in her mind and heart. Beneath the surface lies truth. Within silence speaks wisdom. Through kindness blooms magic. She would return to the mushroom ring after the next rainfall, and the next, and many times thereafter during her years at Hogwarts. Each visit would deepen her understanding of the forest's quiet magic, and of the interconnected nature of all living things. The fungi would become her teachers, her confidants, her link to an ancient wisdom that few wizards or witches ever glimpsed. But for now, Eliza was content to carry their first gift within her, the ability to perceive the hidden connections that ran like luminous threads beneath the surface of the visible world. And as she entered the Great Hall, where students gathered in laughing groups over breakfast, she began to notice these connections everywhere, glowing faintly in her newly enhanced perception, threads of friendship, of rivalry, of unspoken admiration, of shared secrets and silent understanding. The world had always been this way, she realized, rich with invisible relationships and subtle exchanges of energy. The mushroom ring had simply helped her to see what had always been there, waiting to be discovered by those who approached life with kindness, curiosity, and a willingness to listen to the quiet voices that spoke from the heart of things. And in this revelation was perhaps the greatest magic of all, not the flashy spells and potions that dominated their classes, but the deep, abiding enchantment of connection, of belonging to a world where nothing was truly separate, where everything participated in a grand cosmic conversation of giving and receiving, of growth and decay, of endings that were really just new beginnings in disguise. As Eliza reached for a warm scone, she silently thanked the forest and its luminous guardians for this gift of perception that would shape her understanding of magic and of life itself for all the years to come. The first time Matteo heard the humming, he was sure he'd imagined it. It had been well past midnight, and he'd been standing at his dormitory window, unable to sleep due to thoughts of the upcoming OWL examinations that were still months away. The Hufflepuff common room always felt coziest at night, warm firelight dancing across the burnished copper fixtures, the scent of soil from the hanging plants mingling with the lingering aroma of baked goods that someone had smuggled up from the kitchens. But despite the comforts of his house, sleep had eluded him, and he'd found himself gazing out toward the forbidden forest, watching the silvery moonlight caress the treetops. That's when he heard it. A low, gentle humming that seemed to float on the still night air, coming from somewhere deep within the woods. At first he dismissed it as the wind, though the night was peculiarly windless, the trees perfectly still in the spring air. Then he wondered if it might be some nocturnal creature, though it didn't sound like any animal he'd studied in Care of Magical Creatures. There was something almost musical about the sound, like a cello played so softly one had to strain to hear its melody. The next morning, he'd convinced himself it had been nothing more than a dream, a product of his overtired mind. He had a tendency to conjure vivid scenarios when stressed, a trait his mother called an overactive imagination, and his father called the heart of a true Hufflepuff, always finding magic in the ordinary. But 3 nights later, as he stood at the same window rubbing sleep from his eyes after waking from a strange dream, he heard it again, the humming. Deeper and more resonant than before, carrying through the windless night with a clarity that made Matteo's skin prickle with goosebumps. It wasn't frightening, exactly, not in the way the howls or screeches of other forest inhabitants might be. There was something soothing about it, something that called to him, like the memory of a lullaby heard in infancy, familiar, comforting, even if you couldn't quite place where you'd heard it before. Matteo was not generally one for breaking rules. As a 5th-year prefect, he took his responsibilities seriously, but after hearing the humming on 5 separate occasions, always on still windless nights, always seeming to emanate from the same general direction in the forest, his curiosity had become an irresistible itch. Which was why, on this particularly warm spring evening, as curfew approached, Matteo found himself not heading back to his common room as he should, but instead slipping quietly through a little used side door and out onto the grounds. The sun had set nearly an hour ago, but the western sky still held a faint glow, turning the world into soft silhouettes and deepening shadows. He had chosen this night carefully. Professor Sinistra had cancelled astronomy class due to an unexpected spring shower earlier in the day that had left the telescopes and observation platforms too wet to use. This meant fewer professors and prefects patrolling the grounds, and a better chance of making it to the forest's edge undetected. Matteo moved swiftly across the lawn, his wand tucked securely in his pocket. He didn't light it. The quarter moon provided just enough illumination to avoid tripping over anything, and he didn't want to draw attention. His heart pounded in his chest, equal parts exhilaration and anxiety. He'd never done anything like this before. As he approached the forest's edge, doubts began to creep in. The forbidden forest was prohibited to students for good reason. It contained creatures that could be dangerous, magical phenomena that could be unpredictable. What if the humming was actually the call of some predator, luring unsuspecting prey closer? But something deeper than logic drove Matteo forward. The humming had awakened a sense of wonder in him that he hadn't felt since his first days at Hogwarts, when everything from the moving staircases to the ghosts gliding through walls had seemed like marvels beyond imagining. Over the years, as classes and responsibilities had accumulated, some of that wonder had faded, replaced by the mundane concerns of essays and exams and prefect duties. He wanted it back, that feeling of awe. And somehow he knew the source of the humming could provide it. Taking a deep breath, Matteo stepped into the forest. The atmosphere changed immediately. The air felt thicker, more alive with scents and subtle movements. Without the open sky above, the darkness deepened considerably, and he finally drew his wand, whispering, "Lumos minima." The smallest version of the light spell created just enough glow to illuminate a few feet ahead of him, without hopefully attracting too much attention from anything or anyone that might be watching. Matteo had no precise destination in mind. He was hoping to hear the humming again and follow it to its source. For now, he simply walked deeper into the forest, choosing paths that seemed less overgrown, less likely to lead him into trouble. He checked his watch. He'd give himself 30 minutes to explore, and if he hadn't found anything by then, he'd turn back. Staying out all night was not part of the plan. As he walked, the forest seemed to grow more attentive around him, as if assessing this unusual nighttime visitor. Eyes occasionally gleamed from between trees or from within dense underbrush, but whatever creatures they belonged to kept their distance, perhaps as curious about him as he was about his surroundings. 20 minutes into his expedition, Matteo was beginning to think he'd need to abandon his quest when he heard it. The humming. Faint at first, but unmistakable. That deep, resonant tone that had called to him from his dormitory window. He stood perfectly still, turning his head slowly to pinpoint the direction. There, to his left, where the trees seemed to thin out slightly. The humming was coming from that way, more distinct with each passing moment. It didn't seem to be growing louder exactly, but rather clearer, as if the forest itself was quieting to allow the sound to reach him more effectively. Matteo moved toward it, his previous caution giving way to growing excitement. The undergrowth became sparser as he walked, making it easier to navigate between the ancient trees. His wand light caught glimpses of small, luminous creatures, perhaps fairies or will-o'-the-wisps, flitting just out of clear view. And then, quite suddenly, he emerged into a clearing he hadn't seen coming, his breath caught in his throat. In the center of the clearing stood a tree unlike any Matteo had ever seen at Hogwarts, or in any magical botanical text he'd studied. It was neither particularly tall nor remarkably broad, but there was something undeniably extraordinary about it. Its bark was pale, almost silvery in the moonlight, that now streamed unobstructed through the canopy opening above. The trunk twisted gently, not in the gnarled way of very old trees, but in a fluid, almost graceful spiral that reminded Matteo of a slow dance, frozen in time. Most striking, however, were its roots. Rather than disappearing directly into the ground, they emerged from the base of the trunk and arched above the soil before delving downward, creating shapes that looked remarkably like pairs of folded hands, as if the tree was continuously offering up silent prayers to the sky above. And it was humming. The sound emanated not from any specific part of the tree, but seemed to resonate from its entire being. Trunk, branches, leaves, and those extraordinary roots, all vibrating in perfect harmony to create the deep, cello-like tone that had drawn Matteo from his dormitory. Gathered around the roots were dozens of fireflies, their gentle illumination pulsing in perfect rhythm with the trees humming. They created a soft carpet of living light that ebbed and flowed like the breathing of some vast, slumbering creature. Matteo extinguished his wand light, no longer needing it with the combined glow of the moon and fireflies. He approached the tree slowly, reverently, feeling as though he'd stumbled upon something ancient and sacred. The humming grew neither louder nor more insistent as he drew near. It maintained its steady, welcoming resonance. When he was within arm's reach of the trunk, Matteo paused, unsure of the proper etiquette when meeting such a clearly magical entity. Should he speak? Touch the bark? Simply listen? The humming seemed to shift slightly in tone, becoming somehow questioning, and Matteo took this as an invitation. "Hello," he said softly, feeling only a little foolish for speaking to a tree. "My name is Matteo. I heard you humming from my window and, well, I suppose I came to listen more closely." The humming modulated again, taking on a warmth that hadn't been there before, as if expressing pleasure at being heard and understood. The fireflies around the roots pulsed more brightly for a moment, then resumed their gentle rhythm. Tentatively, Matteo reached out and placed his palm against the smooth bark of the trunk. Immediately, a sensation of profound warmth spread up his arm and into his chest, but it wasn't heat in the conventional sense. It felt more like the emotional warmth of being wrapped in a favorite blanket on a cold day, or the comfort of a hand holding yours when you're frightened. And with that warmth came images, filtering into his mind like sunlight through leaves. A view of Hogwarts Castle, but different, smaller, newer, with fewer towers and none of the more modern additions. People moved across the grounds wearing robes of a more ancient cut, carrying wands that looked heavier, less refined than those of the present day. The scene shifted to the Great Hall, where 4 individuals sat at a high table deep in conversation. 2 men and 2 women, dressed in finery that identified them immediately to Matteo, even without seeing their faces clearly. The founders, Godrich Gryffindor with his distinctive red beard, Helga Hufflepuff's warm smile, Rowena Ravenclaw's intense gaze, and Salazar Slytherin's calculating eyes, not yet hardened with the bitterness that would eventually drive him from the school. They were discussing something of apparent importance, occasionally gesturing toward large plans spread before them on the table. Architectural drawings, it seemed, for expansions to the still new school. The vision was so vivid, so immediate that Matteo gasped, his hand momentarily pulling away from the tree's trunk. The images faded instantly, and the humming took on a note of what might have been gentle encouragement. Understanding, Matteo placed his palm back against the bark, and the vision resumed. The scene had changed. Now he saw a young woman with Hufflepuff's crest on her robes, walking through the forest that seemed both familiar and different. Younger trees, paths that didn't exist in Matteo's time. She was gathering plants, occasionally consulting a small book, clearly collecting ingredients for potions or perhaps herbology study. She paused in a clearing. This clearing, Matteo realized, though there was no sign of the humming tree. Instead, the girl knelt and carefully removed something from her satchel. A small sapling, its roots carefully wrapped in damp cloth. With reverent movements, she dug a hole in the rich earth and planted the sapling, then drew her wand and performed a complex series of movements over it, her lips moving in an incantation Matteo couldn't hear. The sapling seemed to shiver, then glow faintly with a golden light that sank into its tender bark. The girl nodded, satisfied, then placed her hand on one of the tiny branches and closed her eyes in apparent concentration. When she opened them again, she was smiling. She spoke to the sapling, and though Matteo couldn't hear her words, he could somehow sense their essence. "Grow well, Guardian. Watch over this forest and those who walk within it. Remember what you see, and when the time is right, share your memories with those who need them most." The girl's face came into clearer focus for a moment, and Matteo felt a jolt of recognition. Though younger than in any portrait he'd seen, there was no mistaking her. Helga Hufflepuff herself, founder of his house, had planted this tree. The vision shifted again, time seeming to accelerate. Matteo caught glimpses of the forest through the changing seasons, years passing in moments, as the sapling grew into a young tree, then a mature one, its distinctive roots gradually forming their unusual hand-like shapes. He saw snippets of visitors, centaurs nodding respectfully as they passed, unicorns pausing to rest in its shade, students from various eras of Hogwarts history occasionally finding their way to the clearing, some seeming to sense the tree's special nature, others simply enjoying the peaceful spot without realizing what company they kept. And always the tree watched, remembered, hummed its gentle song on still nights when sound could travel to attentive ears. The visions began to slow, becoming more distinct again as they approached what Matteo recognized as the recent past, perhaps 50 or 60 years ago, based on the style of Hogwarts robes worn by the students who now entered the clearing. A boy and a girl, perhaps 15 or 16 years old, had spread a blanket beneath the tree and were sharing what appeared to be a picnic lunch. The boy wore Gryffindor colors, the girl Ravenclaw. They were laughing, clearly comfortable with each other, their body language suggesting the easy familiarity of longtime friends. "I still can't believe you found this place," the girl was saying, her voice somehow clear to Matteo despite the visual nature of the memory. "We've been here 5 years, and I've never ventured this far into the forest." The boy grinned. "I follow interesting things, like that group of bowtruckles last week that led me here, or like you, when you're heading to the library with that look that says you're onto something brilliant." The girl blushed slightly, but smiled. "Flatterer, you're just trying to convince me to help with your transfiguration essay. Is it working?" Their laughter blended into the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves above. The boy leaned back against the tree's trunk, his expression growing more thoughtful. "You know, there's something special about this tree. I felt it the first time I came here, like it's, I don't know, aware somehow." The girl nodded, not dismissing the idea as Matteo might have expected. "I feel it too. It's not like the Whomping Willow, not aggressive or obviously magical, but there's something old about it. Wise, maybe?" "Exactly." The boy sat up straighter, excited by her understanding. "I've been reading about magical trees. There aren't many reliable accounts, but some cultures believe certain trees can develop a kind of consciousness over time, especially in places saturated with magic, like Hogwarts." "A magical sentinel," the girl mused, reaching out to touch the pale bark. "Watching over the forest, over the school perhaps." The boy nodded. "I like to imagine it's seen everything. The founding of Hogwarts, the construction of the castle, generations of students. What stories it could tell," the girl said softly, her fingers tracing the patterns in the bark. "Maybe it does tell them in its way," the boy replied. "Maybe we just need to learn how to listen." The vision began to fade, the young couple's conversation becoming indistinct as the memory transitioned once more. Matteo felt a pang of something like disappointment. He had become invested in the pair's story, curious about who they were and what became of them. As if sensing his interest, the tree offered one more brief glimpse. The same clearing, but many years later. The tree was unchanged, but the visitors were much older. A man and woman in their 70s perhaps, with grey hair and lined faces that had retained the essence of the teenagers they had once been. They sat on a conjured bench rather than a blanket, and they leaned slightly into one another, the comfortable posture of a long-married couple. "It hasn't changed at all," the woman said, her voice warm with nostalgia. "After all these years." "Some things don't need to change," the man replied, taking her hand in his. "They're perfect just as they are." The woman smiled. "Do you think it remembers us? From all those afternoons we spent here, studying, talking, falling in love," the man finished, his eyes twinkling. "I think it remembers everything. That's its gift, and its purpose, perhaps, to witness." to remember, to preserve moments that might otherwise be lost to time. The woman nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. I'm glad we came back. Before we couldn't anymore. The man's expression softened with understanding and a touch of sadness. He squeezed her hand gently, but said nothing, the silence between them full of unspoken meaning. After a while, the woman spoke again, her voice stronger. Let's leave it something to remember us by. Something better than an old couple saying goodbye. She reached into her pocket and withdrew her wand, then carefully extracted a small vial of silvery fluid, a memory. With practiced movements, she charmed the vial to become part of the soil at the tree's base, where its contents would gradually be absorbed by those remarkable roots. Our best memories, she explained, of this place, of each other, of the life we built together. Perhaps someday it can share them with someone who needs to believe in happy endings. The vision faded completely, and Matteo found himself back in the present, his hands still pressed against the tree's trunk, tears streaming silently down his face. The emotions of the elderly couple, their love, their appreciation for the long journey they had shared, the bittersweet recognition of its approaching end, had affected him deeply. The tree's humming had changed subtly, becoming a gentle, comforting sound that seemed to acknowledge Matteo's emotional response to what he had been shown. The fireflies around the roots pulsed with a softer light, creating an atmosphere of quiet reverence. Matteo took a shaky breath and wiped his eyes with his free hand, the other still maintaining contact with the tree. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for sharing that with me, for showing me all of it." The humming resonated in a way that felt like acknowledgement. "You were planted by Helga Hufflepuff," Matteo said with wonder. "You've been here since the very beginning of Hogwarts." The tree's vibrations seemed to confirm this, and Matteo felt a surge of pride that the founder of his own house had created something so extraordinary, so enduring. "And you remember everything you've witnessed, everyone who's passed through this clearing." He thought about the couple he'd just seen, their youth, their love, their return in old age. Are they still alive? The couple. The humming took on a sadder note, and Matteo understood. No, they had passed on, leaving only their memories behind, memories the tree now preserved, along with countless others from its long existence. Matteo stood in silence for a while, processing everything he had experienced. The tree continued its gentle humming, patient, as if accustomed to giving visitors the time they needed to absorb what it shared with them. Finally, Matteo spoke again. "I should go back soon. It's late and I'm not supposed to be in the forest," he smiled ruefully, "though I can't bring myself to regret coming." The tree's humming brightened slightly, almost playfully, and Matteo laughed. "Yes, I suppose rules sometimes need to be bent when there's something important to discover." He reluctantly removed his hand from the trunk, and the deep connection he had felt receded, though the tree's presence remained strong and comforting. "May I come back?" Matteo asked. "To visit you again?" The humming took on an inviting tone that needed no translation. "Thank you," Matteo said again, taking a step back. "For everything you showed me, for what you've preserved. It's incredible what you do here." As if in response, a gentle breeze stirred through the clearing. The first movement of air Matteo had felt all evening. It rustled the tree's leaves in a sound almost like applause, and several of the fireflies rose from the roots, surrounding Matteo in a brief, glowing escort as he turned to make his way back through the forest. The journey back to the castle seemed shorter than the journey in, as if the forest itself was helping to guide him safely home. The fireflies accompanied him to the forest's edge, then swirled once around him in a farewell dance before returning to the depths of the woods. As Matteo approached the castle, he was surprised to see that it wasn't as late as he had expected. His encounter with the tree had felt timeless, but his watch showed he had been gone only slightly more than an hour. With luck, he could slip back inside without being noticed. Just as he reached the small side door he had used earlier, however, a voice spoke from the shadows. "Out for an evening constitutional, Mr. Alvarez?" Matteo froze, then turned slowly to face Professor McGonagall, who had emerged from beside the doorway where she had apparently been waiting. Her expression was stern, but there was something in her eyes, a gleam of curiosity perhaps, that gave Matteo hope he wasn't in quite as much trouble as he deserved to be. Yes, Professor," he admitted, seeing no point in denying the obvious. "I went into the forest." McGonagall raised an eyebrow, clearly not having expected such immediate honesty. "Indeed, a direct violation of school rules, as I'm sure you're aware." "Yes, Professor. And what, may I ask, possessed a prefect of your otherwise exemplary record to undertake such a reckless expedition?" Matteo hesitated. Would she believe him if he told her about the humming, about the tree with its remarkable memories? Or would it sound like a fantastical excuse? "I was following a sound," he said finally, deciding that the simple truth was his best option. "A humming that I could hear from my dormitory window on still nights. I was curious about what was making it." McGonagall's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "And did you discover the source of this mysterious humming?" "Yes, Professor. It was a tree, a very special tree with pale bark and roots shaped like hands. It showed me things, memories, from the founding of Hogwarts and other times throughout the school's history." He half expected McGonagall to dismiss this as imagination or, worse, deliberate fiction, but instead a small smile touched her lips. "Ah," she said quietly, "you found the Whisper Elm." Matteo blinked in surprise. "You know about it?" "I do," McGonagall confirmed. "Though few at Hogwarts today remember its existence. It was once better known, a place students would visit when seeking guidance or perspective, particularly in difficult times. But if it's so special, why isn't it mentioned in Hogwarts A History or any of the other books about the school?" Matteo asked. McGonagall's smile grew slightly. "Not all of Hogwarts magic is documented in books, Mr. Alvarez. Some must be discovered through personal experience, through curiosity, and, occasionally, through judicious rule-breaking." She gave him a knowing look. "Though I did not say that, of course." "Of course not, Professor," Matteo agreed, fighting his own smile. "Now, as for your punishment, I understand, Professor. I accept whatever consequences you think appropriate." McGonagall studied him for a moment. 20 points from Hufflepuff for being out after curfew and entering the Forbidden Forest without permission. Matteo nodded, feeling that was more than fair given the circumstances. "And," McGonagall continued, "I believe 2 evenings of detention would be suitable. You will assist Professor Sprout in the greenhouses tomorrow and the following evening." "Yes, Professor." "During which time," she added, her voice softening further, "you might consider sharing with her what you learned from the Whisper Elm. Pomona has a particular interest in magical trees, and I believe she would be most interested in your experience." Matteo's heart lifted. Professor Sprout was not only his head of house, but also one of his favorite teachers. The prospect of discussing the tree with her was more exciting than daunting. "I will, Professor, thank you." McGonagall nodded. "Very well. Off to your dormitory now, without further detours, if you please." As Matteo turned to go, McGonagall spoke once more, her voice carrying a hint of the same wonder he had felt in the forest clearing. The Whisper Elm has been standing since the founding of this school, Mr. Alvarez. It has seen more of Hogwarts history than any living person. What it chooses to share, and with whom, is never without purpose. She paused, then added more gently, "Whatever it showed you was meant for you to see." With that, she gestured him through the door, and Matteo made his way back to the Hufflepuff common room, his mind still full of the visions the tree had shared with him. As he prepared for bed, he found himself wondering about the couple he had seen, their names, their story, what had become of them after Hogwarts. Had they had children, grandchildren? Were any of their descendants at Hogwarts now, perhaps walking the same corridors, unaware of the legacy of love their ancestors had left behind? And what of Helga Hufflepuff herself? What had inspired her to plant such an extraordinary tree? Had she intended it to become what it now was? A living repository of Hogwarts history, a silent witness to generations of magical education and the countless personal stories that had unfolded within and around the castle walls? These questions followed Matteo into his dreams, where the humming of the Whisper Elm provided a gentle soundtrack to visions of Hogwarts through the ages. Students coming and going, the castle itself evolving, yet some core essence remaining unchanged throughout the centuries. When he woke the next morning, Matteo felt refreshed despite his late-night adventure. There was something about having connected with such a deep, enduring piece of Hogwarts history that had settled an unease within him, a worry he hadn't fully acknowledged about his place in the grand continuity of magical education. He had sometimes felt overshadowed by relatives with more dramatic magical talents, or by classmates who seemed destined for remarkable careers at the Ministry, or as auras or renowned magical researchers. Matteo's own strengths were quieter. He excelled in herbology and was skilled at charms, but neither in a way that drew particular attention. He was reliable, hard-working, and kind. True Hufflepuff virtues, but not qualities that made for exciting stories. Yet the Whisper Elm had shown him that quiet lives could be just as meaningful, just as worth remembering as more dramatic ones. The elderly couple returning to the tree in their final days had not been famous wizards or witches. They had simply loved each other and the school that had brought them together, and that love was remembered, preserved, worthy of being shared with a young student a generation later. As Matteo dressed and prepared for the day's classes, he made a silent promise to himself and to the Whisper Elm that he would return to the clearing soon. Not immediately. He didn't want to press his luck with more rule-breaking so soon after being caught, but he would go back, properly this time, perhaps with Professor Sprout's permission after his detention. He wanted to learn more about the tree, about its history and its magic. He wanted to hear more of its stories, to understand better what it had witnessed over the long centuries of its existence. And perhaps, he thought with a smile, he might share a few of his own stories with it, adding his experiences to the rich tapestry of memories the Whisper Elm preserved. For now, though, there were classes to attend, homework to complete, and a detention with Professor Sprout to look forward to. Matteo left his dormitory with a lighter heart than he'd had in weeks. The Whisper Elm's deep, cello-like humming still echoing faintly in his mind, a reminder of the living history that surrounded him at Hogwarts, and of his own small but significant place within it. And that night, as he stood at his dormitory window, gazing out at the moonlit forest once more, Matteo was certain he could hear, ever so faintly, the gentle humming of the Whisper Elm. Not calling him this time, but simply reminding him of its presence, of the connection they now shared across the distance. "I hear you," he whispered to the night, "and I'll come back soon." The humming seemed to deepen briefly, acknowledging his promise, before fading into the quiet breath of the sleeping castle and the ancient, patient forest beyond, where memories lived on in a tree that sang to those with hearts open enough to listen. Winter had descended upon Hogwarts with gentle determination, transforming the castle grounds into a landscape of pristine white. Snow blanketed the sloping lawns, capped the towers, and dusted the branches of the trees at the edge of the forbidden forest, creating a scene that looked like it had been plucked from the pages of a holiday card. For most students, the first substantial snowfall of the season meant snowball fights, ice skating on the frozen shallows of the lake, and warming up afterward with hot chocolate in the Great Hall. But for Emmeline Finch, a fourth-year Hufflepuff with a penchant for quiet exploration, it meant something else entirely. The perfect opportunity to see the world transformed, to discover beauty in places others might overlook. Emmeline had always been drawn to the softer side of magic, not the flashy spells or potions that could transform a person's appearance or make objects fly, but the subtle enchantments that existed within nature itself. She collected fallen leaves that changed color according to one's mood, pressed flowers that hummed gentle melodies when the pages of her journal were turned, and kept a small jar of ever-twinkling fireflies on her bedside table. Professor Sprout often commented that Emmeline had a gift for noticing the magical in the mundane, for finding wonder in places where others saw only the ordinary. It was this gift that had made her one of the professor's favorite students, despite her tendency to become so absorbed in her observations that she occasionally forgot the more practical aspects of her studies. On this particular evening, as the full moon rose over the snow-covered grounds, Emmeline stood at the window of the Hufflepuff common room, watching the silvery light transform the familiar landscape into something ethereal. Most of her housemates were gathered around the fire, playing Exploding Snap or working on essays, the comfortable buzz of conversation creating a cozy backdrop to the winter scene outside. But Emmeline's attention was captured by something unusual at the forest's edge, a faint blue-green glow that seemed to weave between the trees, visible only because of the exceptional clarity of the winter night and the moon's generous illumination. "Do you see that?" she asked, turning to her friend Theo, who was curled up in a nearby armchair with a book on magical creatures. "See what?" Theo looked up, his expression mildly curious. "That light at the edge of the forest. It's like someone's drawn a path with glowing ink." Theo joined her at the window, peering out into the darkness. After a moment, he shook his head. "I don't see anything unusual, just the moon on the snow." Emmeline frowned slightly. The glow was faint, certainly, but to her eyes it was unmistakable. A winding trail of blue-green light that began at the very edge of the forest and disappeared into its depths. "It's right there," she insisted, pointing. "How can you not see it?" Theo gave her a patient smile. "Em, you're always seeing things the rest of us miss. Remember those invisible flower sprites you swore were living in the greenhouse last spring?" "Professor Sprout confirmed they were there," Emmeline protested. "Only after you spent 3 weeks leaving tiny dishes of honey and dew water for them," Theo reminded her. "The point is, you notice things most people don't. It's your special magic." Emmeline turned back to the window, still watching the mysterious glow. Perhaps Theo was right. Perhaps this was something only she could see for whatever reason. And if that was the case, "I'm going to check it out," she decided, already moving toward her cloak, which hung on a peg near the common room entrance. Theo's eyes widened. "Now? It's almost curfew and it's freezing outside, and that's the forbidden forest you're talking about." "I'll be quick," Emmeline promised, wrapping her yellow and black striped scarf around her neck. and I'll stay at the very edge, just to see what's causing that light. I won't go in deep." Theo looked skeptical but knew better than to try to dissuade his friend when her curiosity was piqued. "At least take your wand," he said, handing it to her from where she'd left it on a side table. "And if you're not back in half an hour, I'm getting Professor Sprout." Emmeline nodded, tucking her wand into her cloak pocket. "Fair enough. But I'll be fine, I just want a closer look." With that, she slipped out of the common room and made her way through the quiet corridors of the castle. At this hour, most students were in their respective houses, and the professors were either in their offices or their private quarters. With luck, she could make it outside and back without being noticed. The entrance hall was deserted as Emmeline crossed to the great oak doors, easing one open just enough to slip through. The blast of cold air took her breath away for a moment, but it wasn't the bitter cold of deep winter, just the crisp, clean chill of a December evening, sharp enough to bring colour to her cheeks, but not uncomfortable enough to drive her back inside. The snow crunched pleasantly beneath her boots as she made her way across the grounds, the sound oddly amplified in the stillness of the night. Above her, the full moon hung like a silver galleon in a sky scattered with stars, casting enough light that she didn't need to use Lumos to find her way. As she approached the forest's edge, the blue-green glow she had spotted from the common room window became more distinct. It was, indeed, a path, a winding trail of what appeared to be some sort of bioluminescent fungi, growing along the forest floor in a deliberate pattern that couldn't possibly be natural. Emmeline had read about foxfire, a rare magical variety of bioluminescent mushroom that typically grew on decaying wood in ancient forests. But foxfire usually appeared as isolated patches, not as an organized trail, and certainly not one that seemed to have formed overnight, as she was certain this one had. She had been to the forest's edge just yesterday to collect pine cones for a holiday decoration project, and there had been no glowing path then. Kneeling at the start of the trail, Emmeline examined the glowing organisms more closely. They weren't mushrooms at all, she realized, but tiny star-shaped flowers, each no larger than her smallest fingernail, growing close to the ground with delicate translucent petals that emitted the blue-green light. She had never seen or read about anything like them. The flowers formed a clear path, about a foot wide, that wound between the trees and deeper into the forest. It was as if someone, or something, had carefully planted them to create a route that invited following. Emmeline glanced back at the castle, its windows glowing warmly in the distance. She had promised Theo she wouldn't go into the forest, only look at the edge, but the path beckoned with an almost magnetic appeal. Surely it would be safe to follow it just a little way. After all, if someone or something had created this path, they must have done so for a reason, and Emmeline couldn't shake the feeling that the reason had something to do with her ability to see it when Theo could not. Taking a deep breath, she stepped onto the path. The moment her boot touched the glowing flowers, they brightened slightly, as if responding to her presence. Instead of being crushed, they seemed to bend around her footstep, then spring back once her weight was lifted. "Curious?" Emmeline murmured, taking another step, and then another. Each time, the flowers brightened momentarily beneath her feet, then returned to their previous gentle glow once she moved on. The path led her deeper into the forest, though not in a threatening way. It seemed to choose the easiest route between trees, avoiding dense underbrush or areas where roots might trip an unwary traveler. The snow was lighter here, caught in the canopy above rather than blanketing the ground, and Emmeline found she could walk quite comfortably, following the painted light of the foxfire trail as it wound its way through the increasingly ancient trees. The usual sounds of the forest at night, the rustling of creatures in the underbrush, the occasional snap of a twig, were muted by the snow, creating an almost reverent silence, broken only by the soft crunch of Emmeline's footsteps and the distant hoot of an owl somewhere above. The air was still and cool, carrying the clean scent of pine and the earthier smells of the forest floor. As she walked, Emmeline became increasingly convinced that the trail was meant for her. It had appeared on the one night she happened to be watching from the window, visible only to her eyes, and now it responded to her footsteps as if acknowledging her presence. But who, or what, had created it? And where was it leading her? She had heard stories, of course, about the various magical beings that dwelled in the Forbidden Forest. Centaurs were known to inhabit its deeper regions, as were unicorns, though both generally avoided humans. There were rumors of more ancient presences as well, forest spirits, dryads, and other entities tied to the old magic of the land, predating even the founding of Hogwarts. Could this be the work of such a being? Emmeline had always been particularly drawn to stories of forest spirits, benevolent entities that protected the natural world and occasionally chose to communicate with humans who showed proper respect for their domains. The idea that such a spirit might have created this path specifically for her sent a thrill of excitement through her, overriding any apprehension she might have felt about venturing further from the castle. She had lost track of how long she had been following the trail when it suddenly widened, the glowing flowers spreading out to encircle a small clearing that Emmeline might have walked past without noticing had the path not led her directly to it. In the center of the clearing was a perfectly round pond, its surface so still it resembled a mirror made of obsidian, reflecting the star-studded sky above with flawless precision. The foxfire trail led right to the edge of the pond and then encircled it completely, creating a glowing boundary that turned the water within into a pool of captured night sky. It was one of the most beautiful things Emmeline had ever seen. Approaching the pond's edge, she knelt on the mossy bank, mesmerized by the perfect reflection. Every star, every wisp of cloud that passed over the moon was reproduced in exquisite detail on the water's surface. It was as if she was looking down into the sky itself, rather than at a mere reflection of it. "Hello?" she called softly, not knowing if anyone or anything was there to hear her, but feeling that some acknowledgement of the magic of this place was appropriate. "Thank you for showing me the way here. It's beautiful." Her voice seemed to be absorbed by the surrounding trees, creating no echo. The clearing remained silent save for the distant owl and the gentle sound of her own breathing. After a moment of hesitation, Emmeline reached out a hand toward the water, curious about its temperature and whether touching it might disrupt the perfect reflection. But just before her fingers made contact, she gasped and drew back. The reflection had changed. The stars and moon were still there, but now, superimposed over them, was an image that had not been there a moment before, and that certainly wasn't a reflection of anything currently in the clearing. It showed Emmeline herself, but older, perhaps in her late 20s or early 30s. She was standing in what appeared to be a greenhouse or conservatory, surrounded by plants unlike any Emmeline had ever seen. Plants that moved with apparent intelligence, that glowed and shifted colors, that seemed to reach toward the older Emmeline with something like affection. The woman's face was alight with joy and passion as she worked among these extraordinary specimens, recording observations in a well-worn journal, her eyes bright with discovery. The scene shifted slightly, and now others were there too, students, it seemed, watching with rapt attention as the older Emmeline demonstrated something with one of the plants. Their faces showed the same wonder and excitement that Emmeline herself felt, whenever she discovered some new magical aspect of the natural world. The vision was so clear, so detailed, that Emmeline could almost hear the excited murmur of the students, could almost feel the warm, humid air of the conservatory on her skin, and the emotion that radiated from her older self, a profound satisfaction, a sense of being exactly where she was meant to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, was palpable, even across the barrier of time and impossibility that separated them. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the vision faded, and the pond once again showed only the perfect reflection of the night sky above. Emmeline sat back on her heels, heart racing, mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. It hadn't been a mere reflection or even a random vision. It had been a glimpse of a possible future, one that resonated with desires she had barely acknowledged, even to herself. She had never told anyone that she sometimes dreamed of becoming more than just a casual observer of magical flora and fauna, that she harbored a secret ambition to discover new species, to understand the deeper magic inherent in the natural world, and perhaps someday to share that knowledge with others as a teacher or researcher. It seemed too grand an ambition for someone like her, too unlikely a path for a girl who often forgot assignments because she was too busy watching the patterns made by fairy dust on flower petals. And yet the pond had shown her exactly that future, rendered in such vivid detail that it could not be dismissed as mere fancy. It had shown her an unspoken wish, a dream she had kept so private that she had hardly dared to shape it into concrete thoughts, let alone words. "How did you know?" she whispered to the pond, to the forest, to whatever presence had guided her here. "How could you possibly know what I want, when I've barely admitted it to myself?" Again there was no answer, but the foxfire flowers around the pond's edge pulsed once, their glow intensifying briefly before returning to their steady blue-green light. It was acknowledgement enough. Emmeline sat in silence for a long time, contemplating the vision and what it might mean. Was it a guarantee of her future, or merely one possibility among many? Was it meant as encouragement to pursue the path she secretly desired, or simply as reassurance that her dreams were valid, worthy of consideration? Whatever its purpose, the vision had affected her deeply. It had taken a nebulous longing and transformed it into something tangible, something she could see and almost touch. It had made her secret wish real in a way it hadn't been before. As she sat lost in thought, Emmeline became aware of a subtle change in the air around her. The temperature was dropping as the night deepened, and small flakes of snow had begun to drift down through the gaps in the canopy above, landing on her cloak and hair with delicate precision. It was time to return to the castle. Theo would be worried if she stayed out much longer, and despite the magic of what she had experienced, Emmeline had no desire to be caught out of bounds after curfew, especially not in the forbidden forest. Standing, she brushed the snow from her cloak and took one last look at the pond, its surface now gently disturbed by the falling snowflakes. The perfect reflection, broken into 1,000 twinkling fragments. "Thank you," she said again, addressing the clearing, the pond, the foxfire path, whatever or whoever had created this magical experience for her. "I won't forget what you've shown me." As if in response, the foxfire flowers around the pond pulsed once more, and then, to Emmeline's amazement, they began to shift, the path reorienting itself to lead back the way she had come. The flowers that had guided her into the forest were rearranging themselves to guide her out again. Smiling with wonder, Emmeline followed the reconfigured path. It led her through the trees with the same gentle guidance as before, avoiding obstacles, choosing the easiest route, responding to her footsteps with momentary brightening as she walked. The journey back seemed shorter than the journey in, though whether this was due to the path choosing a more direct route or simply to Emmeline's preoccupation with her thoughts, she couldn't say. Before she knew it, she was emerging from the forest's edge, the glowing trail ending precisely where it had begun, at the border between the wild woods and the tamed grounds of Hogwarts. The castle looked exactly as she had left it, its windows glowing warmly against the night, snow continuing to fall gently around it. It looked like no time at all had passed, though Emmeline knew she must have been gone for at least an hour. Glancing back, she saw that the foxfire path was already beginning to fade, the blue-green glow dimming as if the tiny starflowers were closing their petals for the night. Within moments, the trail was gone entirely, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. But Emmeline knew it had been real. The vision in the pond, the magic of the path that had known where to lead her. Those things had happened, and they had changed something within her. A seed of possibility had been planted, one that would grow alongside her in the years to come, guiding her choices, just as surely as the foxfire path had guided her steps through the forest. With a heart full of quiet wonder, she made her way back across the snowy grounds toward the castle entrance. To her surprise, the great oak door was ajar when she reached it, and standing in the gap, wearing an expression that mixed relief with exasperation, was Theo. "There you are," he exclaimed in a hushed voice, quickly pulling her inside. "I was about to come looking for you. It's been nearly 2 hours, Em." 2 hours? Emmeline blinked in confusion. "Are you sure? It didn't feel nearly that long." "I'm positive," Theo said, guiding her through the entrance hall toward the staircase that would take them back to the Hufflepuff common room. "I've been watching the clock since you left. What happened? Did you find out what that light was?" Emmeline hesitated. Her experience felt deeply personal, almost sacred in its intimacy, and yet Theo was her closest friend, the person who understood her fascination with the quieter magics of the world better than anyone else at Hogwarts. "It was a path," she said finally, keeping her voice low as they descended the stairs toward the basement corridor that led to their common room. "A trail made of tiny flowers that glow like foxfire, but they're not mushrooms. They're like stars that grow from the earth, and they led me to a clearing with a pond that shows things." "What kind of things?" Theo asked, his initial skepticism giving way to curiosity as he recognized the genuine wonder in Emmeline's voice. "Things you don't say out loud, but that you want more than anything," she replied softly. "The pond showed me a future. A possible future, I think. Doing something I've always dreamed of doing, but never really believed I could." They had reached the stack of barrels that concealed the entrance to the Hufflepuff common room. Theo tapped the rhythm on the correct barrel, and as the passage opened, he gave Emmeline a look of understanding. "The greenhouse," he said simply. "It showed you working with plants, didn't it? Discovering new species, maybe teaching others about them?" Emmeline stared at him in surprise. "How did you know that?" Theo smiled as they entered the warmth of the common room, now mostly empty except for a few seventh years studying in the corner. "Because I know you, Em. I've seen the way your face lights up when Professor Sprout introduces a new plant in herbology, or when you find some magical moss or flower that no one else has noticed. You were born to work with magical plants. I've always thought that. You just haven't realized it yourself yet." Emmeline felt a rush of affection for her friend, whose perception apparently ran deeper than she had realized. "Well, now I have," she said, smiling. "Thanks to a mysterious path that only I could see, and a pond that reads unspoken wishes." "Just another Tuesday at Hogwarts," Theo said with a grin, but his eyes were kind. So what will you do now? With this revelation from the forest, I mean. Emmeline considered the question as they settled into their favorite armchairs near the dying fire. What would she do with the vision she had been shown? I think I'll talk to Professor Sprout tomorrow, she said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke. Not about the forest or the pond. That still feels like something I should keep private. But about whether she would let me help more in the greenhouses, maybe with some independent study on magical flora. And I'll pay more attention in potions and care of magical creatures, since both of those subjects would be useful for what I want to do eventually. Theo nodded approvingly. That sounds like a good start. And who knows, maybe in a few years you'll be the one discovering some new magical plant that changes the wizarding world. I don't know about changing the world, Emmeline said, thinking of the joy on her older self's face as she worked among her plants and shared her knowledge with eager students. But maybe I can add something beautiful to it, something that helps people understand the magic that's all around us, even in the quietest places. They sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the last embers of the fire glow orange and gold against the hearth. Outside the round windows of the common room, snow continued to fall, transforming the grounds into a fresh canvas of white that would greet them in the morning. Eventually, they said their goodnights and headed to their respective dormitories. As Emmeline prepared for bed, she found herself touching the pocket of her cloak where she had impulsively plucked one of the tiny starflowers from the foxfire path just before it had faded away. To her delight, it was still there, its glow dimmed but present, a small blue-green beacon nestled in the fabric. Carefully, she transferred it to a small glass vial she kept on her bedside table for collecting interesting specimens, adding a few drops of water from her water glass. The flower seemed to appreciate this, its glow brightening slightly as it floated in the liquid. It was a small piece of evidence, a token to remind her that the night's adventure had been real and not a dream born of moonlight and imagination. And as Emmeline drifted off to sleep, the gentle glow of the starflower watching over her like a miniature guardian, she carried with her the image from the pond. Her future self, radiant with purpose and joy, surrounded by magical plants and eager students, exactly where she was meant to be. In the days and weeks that followed, Emmeline did indeed speak with Professor Sprout, who was delighted by her students' increased interest in herbology and magical botany. The professor gladly arranged for Emmeline to assist in the greenhouses several afternoons a week, and provided her with additional reading materials on rare magical plants and their properties. Emmeline also found herself paying more attention in her other classes, seeing connections she hadn't noticed before, how the movements of celestial bodies affected the growth patterns of certain plants, how the magical properties of various creatures could enhance or inhibit the magical characteristics of flora that shared their habitats. The world seemed to have expanded, offering pathways and possibilities that had always been there but that she had never quite dared to explore. And through it all, the tiny starflower remained alive in its vial on her bedside table, its gentle glow a constant reminder of the magic that had shown her what she could become if she had the courage to follow where curiosity led. As winter deepened, Emmeline occasionally glanced out the window of the Hufflepuff common room at dusk, watching the edge of the forbidden forest with quiet anticipation. Would the foxfire path appear again? Would it lead her to new wonders, new revelations about herself and the magical world she inhabited? But the path did not reappear, at least not during that winter. Emmeline wasn't disappointed, though. She understood instinctively that some magic occurred only when needed, only at the precise moment when someone was ready to receive its gifts. The foxfire path had come when she needed guidance, when her unspoken wish required acknowledgement and validation. Now that wish had been given form and direction. It had become a goal, a purpose that would shape her remaining years at Hogwarts and the life that awaited her beyond. She didn't need the path to show her the way anymore. She had found it herself, with a little help from the quiet magic of the forest. Still, on particularly clear nights when the moon was full, Emmeline sometimes stood at her window a little longer than usual, watching the forest's edge with a small smile, sending silent gratitude to whatever presence had created the foxfire trail for her to follow. And sometimes, just sometimes, she thought she saw a faint blue-green glow among the trees. Not a path this time, but a brief, acknowledging pulse, like a distant friend waving hello. Whether it was real or just her imagination, Emmeline didn't mind. The magic of that winter night had been a gift freely given, asking nothing in return except that she honor the truth it had revealed. And that she intended to do, one day and one discovery at a time, until the vision in the pond became reality, until she became the woman she was meant to be, surrounded by extraordinary plants and sharing their magic with the world. The small starflower in its vial continued to glow by her bedside, a living talisman from the forest, a remembrance of the night she had followed painted light through the darkness, and found, at its end, a reflection of her own unspoken dream. And in its gentle illumination, Emmeline found the courage to walk her own path, one step at a time toward the future that awaited her. A future as magical and full of wonder as the foxfire trail that had first shown her the way. Our magical journey through Hogwarts comes to a close for tonight. Now you'll hear the gentle crackling of the common room fire and soothing ambient sounds of the castle to accompany you as you drift off to sleep. These calming sounds will continue without any advertisements or interruptions. May your dreams be filled with magic and wonder, and may you sleep as peacefully as if you were tucked away in your cozy four-poster bed in the dormitory. Good night, dear witch or wizard, until our next adventure in the wizarding world.